Hey everyone, it's Chica. Today I'm going to share a bunch of painting tips to help you create altered moments. As you know, I've been painting Precious Moments figurines to create my own altered moments. Hopefully you've already seen my getting started video that walks through all of the supplies, paints, and tools that I use to create these pieces. I've also got an in-depth tutorial showing the different kinds of clays that I use, and a video showing the cutting techniques I use when I need to remove pieces from the Precious Moments. But today I'm going to share a bunch of painting tips with you that will help you create your altered moments. I've got my brushes, I've got my paint. Let's go. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about is the actual paint that I'm using. And I talk about this all the time, but it's so important to use the right kind of paint. So the paint that I like to use is this DecoArt Americana multi-surface paint. So it's water-based, which is going to have a huge impact on a couple of the tips down the road that I'm going to show you. It sticks to the porcelain with no problem. I don't have to prime or anything. And it has a satin finish. Whether you want the satin finish in your end result or not, having the satin finish while you're working is actually really going to help with the painting. I'll show you that here soon. So this is what I like to use, the multi-surface. Okay, now let's talk about brushes. Brushes are really important, and a lot of the things we're going to do are going to work better or worse depending on the brushes you use. You want nice soft bristles on the end, ideally coming to a point for like a nice fine liner brush. This one is good for painting big areas. You definitely want really soft, gentle edges. What you do not want is something like this. You don't want this squared off edge. This is not going to leave a nice finish on your piece when you paint it. This is not a good brush. This one also not great because it's got that squared edge. Definitely go for something softer and rounder. That's going to give you a lot better look. Real quick, I want to talk about if you need to mix a custom color. Sometimes you need to make a custom color. When you do this, keep in mind that you are never going to be able to recreate this if you decide you need to later. Maybe we're going to add a little bit of green to this one. Maybe we're just trying to find just the right shade. Now, when you get this perfect custom color made and blended perfectly well, there's a couple things that you can do to be able to preserve this to use it again. If you think you're going to use this a lot, you might want to make a whole 2-ounce bottle of it. This is actually what I did for Mr. T. This is the color I used for his skin. I made a whole bunch of it because I knew I would want more of it. If you don't need that much, maybe you just go for a paint pot and store it in here. This is Monica's dress. This is Mr. T's overalls. This is Taylor's hair. Things like this, you can save just that little bit in case you need it again, especially if you think you might need it again later for a different piece, but definitely for touch-ups. Now, if this is just a quick bit that you have and you don't want to mess with a paint pot, you don't think you need to save that much extra, there's actually a way just to save that little bit for later, maybe for that second coat. Just take a little piece of plastic wrap and put it right over the top of your wet paint to keep it from drying out. That's all you really need to do. This will protect it until you're ready. And then when it's time for the second coat, you can just peel it back, get to that paint again, and save it again. Now, this is not going to last a really long time, but it will last a couple of hours until you get that piece done. One last tip I want to share about making these custom colors. If you do decide to save it in a bottle or a paint pot or something like this, I recommend that you put a little bit of paint on top of the bottle. So for this example right here, if we had wanted to store this in a paint pot, I would take the end of a brush and get a nice big glob of it on there, and then just kind of go like this on the top of the paint pot. Okay, let that dry. Once you have this dry, this is going to be a really good example of what the paint color looks like when it's dry, because it's very different dry than it is wet. I actually do this for my straight bottle colors too. I will put a little dot of it on the top so that I know that this is the color, because sometimes when you're looking for that exact color, it's really hard to match it to what you can see through the bottle, but this shows you what it's going to look like dry. So, good tip. Okay, one more tip about the paint itself, and we're going to talk about the opacity. As much as I love this paint, some of the colors are kind of translucent and take a couple of coats to get on there. But I have a little tip that will help you to increase the opacity of a color. All right, I've got some of this green paint here, and this is the piece that we're going to paint. We'll just brush some of this on here, and you will see it doesn't really cover great in terms of opacity. You can kind of see through that, right? All right, now let me show you my trick. I'm going to grab some white paint. It can be white, it can be a tan, anything that's got a lot of titanium oxide pigment in it. And what we're going to do, we're just going to mix a little bit of this white into the green. And just by mixing it, yes, it does lighten it a little bit, but when it's the type of thing where maybe the color doesn't matter as much, just adding that little bit of white is actually going to help a lot with the opacity. Now that color's not really too far off from what we had originally, right? All right, so now let's dip into this and let's paint this side. Look at that difference. Okay, yes, the color is a little bit lighter, but you see how you can't see through this, but you can see through this one? So this is a great way to get that base coat and get some good coverage. And then you can come back later with a second coat of the original color, and that is going to give you the color that you want. Just mixing that little bit of white in on the first coat is going to save you at least a coat or two when you try to get your solid color. I'm going to go through this again just to show with a little bit of black. So here's my straight up black paint. So there is just straight black. The black is one of those that definitely takes a couple of coats to get solid coverage. But if we take a little bit of this white and mix it in, yes, we're going to end up with gray instead of black, but we can get pretty close. And again, this is just our base coat. We're just trying to get that opacity going. All right, let's put some of this on this side. Can you see that incredible difference? This side with our straight black, you can see through it. This side with that little bit of white mixed in, it's a such better coverage. I really like that. When we come back for our second coat, we'll just do straight black over this, and this will save us a coat. This is going to take 2 more coats to get coverage. This should just take 1. Let's let this dry and we'll come back and see. Okay, it's been a few minutes. We let this dry, so let's see how it looks. All right, the paint is dried. We have the original black here and then the black mixed with a little bit of white here. And I'm going to go back into the straight black so that we can see the difference. So here is coat number 2 on this side, and coat number 2 on this side. All right, can you see the difference there? This here, I would put 1 more coat on that just to be sure that it was really nice and solid opaque. This side, look at the difference. Look how nice and black that is. Just having that base coat under there with a little bit of white mixed in made all the difference. Next, I want to talk about how you decide which part of the piece to paint first. This is just an example piece that I'm going to use for illustration here. Pay no attention to this brown. We're coming back to that later. But let's think about how we would decide what order to paint this in. Now, I'll be perfectly honest with you. Sometimes when I'm creating my pieces that I'm going to share in videos, I might paint them in the not optimal order because I want to paint them in the kind of order that leaves you guys in suspense so that you don't know what it is until the very end. That's just kind of how I like to do it. And if you are not painting to share with people and you just want to do things in the most efficient way possible, then this is going to help you out. So let's say we were painting this little guy. He's got a shirt, sign, and these pants, and then this ring box. So where would you start? Believe it or not, I'm going to suggest that you start with the hardest parts first. Let's say that I painted this jewelry box first and then tried to get in afterwards to paint in here on his legs. That would be so hard because I would be constantly touching the jewelry box with my paintbrush, and that's just going to make things difficult. Let's say that I painted the pants before I painted the shirt. Well, now every time I'm reaching in here to try to get to that shirt, I might touch the pants and I might get some paint where I don't want it to be. Or to go really extreme, let's say that I was going to paint the back of this sign. If I paint his shirt first and then try to get to the back of the sign, I guarantee I'm going to get paint on the shirt while I try to do the sign. So what I'm getting at is paint the hardest parts first. Anything that is hard to get that little brush down into, do it first. So to recap here, the order that I would do this on, if I were to paint every single piece, I would do the sign at the back of the sign, then I would do the shirt under here, then the pants, then the jewelry box, and then the base. I'm not going to paint this whole piece today, but I am going to paint the pants because I want to show you a good example of getting down in there and painting those crevices. So let's just say we're going to start with his pants down here. And I'm just going to paint his pants. Now, as I do this, I'm going to show you a couple of extra techniques. When I'm painting these pants, do I want to try to get the paint only on the pants and try to worry about that line? No. This is a great tip. Pay attention. Overpaint any of your extended areas. I'm going to get this paint in here. I'm going to get it on the base. Now, this is of course assuming I'm going to paint the base another color later, which I am, but anytime you're painting a tough spot and you know you're going to paint the spot next to it later, overpaint. See how there's paint down on there? You're going to see why this is helpful here in a little bit, but I'm definitely going to just show you getting this brush down in there and painting all of these little areas. I'm gonna do the same thing up here on the line between his pants and his shirt. I'm gonna paint, and I'm gonna let the paint go up onto his shirt a little bit. Now, when you do this, you also need to be very conscious of brush strokes and kind of feather the edge of that paint. You don't want to leave a ridge of paint because you'll see that later. Now let's kind of keep going around here and get his pants all the way painted. And you can see I'm letting the paint get onto his shoes. I'm letting it get onto his shirt. There is no reason to go into great detail on the first color when you know you're going to come back later with the second color. Let's save the detail for that. It'll go a lot more smoothly, trust me. And once again, I'm gonna let this get down onto the base and onto the shoes. All right, let's take a look at what we've got here. I've got his pants painted all the way around. I let the paint go down onto the base and onto his shoes as I worked. I've kind of made a mess, but that's okay. We're gonna come back and take care of that here with my next tip. But first, we have to let this dry. Okay, while that's drying, I'm going to talk a little bit about painting the clay. If you watched my clay video, you know for sure that I recommend waiting to paint after the clay has dried completely. There's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, if you put paint over the clay and seal it, it's not going to fully dry on the inside because the moisture doesn't have a way to get out. So you definitely want your clay to be able to dry before you seal it up. Another reason to wait is that sometimes your clay might need a little bit of reworking after it's dry before it's ready to paint. You might have a crack that needs to be filled, you might want to sand something, you might just want to polish it a little bit before you paint. If you paint it while it's still wet, then you don't have that chance to do that, so you want to make sure your clay is as stable as possible before you start adding any paint. Okay, are you ready? I'm going to show you my favorite tip of all. Now, let's say that we're painting this sleeve here and we want to paint his sleeve, but not his hand. So let's get a little bit of red paint here. I'm gonna use red so you can see it really well. This is going to show you exactly why I really like these water-based paints. So we're painting this little sleeve red, and I'm going straight into this red paint and just painting it along here and getting it right up against his hand. And then you realize, oh no, I got a little bit on his hand. Do you see that? Well, this is when you grab a slightly larger brush, definitely comes to a point, dip it in some water and kind of wipe the excess off. And watch this. You can actually take this wet brush and use it sort of as an eraser and remove that extra paint. And you can just run this right along. Because this is a water-based paint, and as long as you act before it dries, you can just wipe that right away. Now, that is not something that's going to work with all paints. It is one of the reasons I really like this paint. All right, I got my nice straight, clean line there. You see that? So let that dry a little bit, come back with the red paint and try again. Maybe we'll get a little bit better this time. All right, let's try again and see if I can get that better this time. There we go. Much nicer. Let's work on the top of his hand here. See why these tiny little brushes really make the difference. Okay, pretty good. I got, oh, there's a little bit extra there that I want to try to wipe away. Go back to my wet brush and just give that a gentle little swipe right there. There we go. See that? Isn't that nice? That really helps with those fine lines. So you can see now that I've got this really nice line there and it looks really good, but it actually probably doesn't look as good as you think. Let me show you the next little tip that you need. And that is a magnifying glass that lights up. This is going to show you all of those little imperfections. So I'm going to take this under the magnifying glass with the light and see how it looks. Now, because of the way the camera is set up, this may not show it too much bigger for you, but trust me, from my perspective, I can really see the difference. And I know that I need to come in here and do just a little more touch up to get that red exactly where I want it. Now, do you have to do this step? No. Do I do it? Yes. It's where that perfectionist gene comes into play, I guess. Now I'm satisfied. I just showed you on that example how if you get paint onto the unfinished porcelain, you can wipe it away with a wet brush. But you can actually do that over other paint as well. So let me show you this example. This is a piece that I just painted this just as an example here, and this has got this nice satin finish of this dried paint, and this is going to really pay off for us because let me just show you, suppose I want to dig into this blue and add some decoration to this. Maybe I wanted to put a little heart on here. Okay. So because I put that heart on there and maybe I didn't quite get it exactly right, that wet brush trick works really well on paint over paint. I can just swipe that right down, and make that perfect line. Now you can actually see that it went down a little bit, but guess what? You can wipe that away too. Paint will stick to paint, but because of this satin finish, you have great working time with removing your second coat of paint and getting that exactly the way you want it. What if you decide you don't want it at all? Q-tip, a little bit of water, I can actually just wipe that away completely, just like it started from scratch. Being able to wipe that away completely can really come in handy if you're trying to mess with lettering or any sort of detail design, anything that you're painting over top of something that's already painted. If you have a matte paint here, you will not be able to wipe away your added on paint. With this satin finish, you can. I can take this red and just messed it up, right? No, because I can take my Q-tip, I can wipe it all away. Look at that, just like new. If you're starting out and you're trying to do a lot of detailed work, this is a really great reason to use this satin finish because it makes it so easy to fix your mistakes, wipe away your paint, and get it right when you're trying to learn. I will say though that once this multi-surface paint dries, it does not come off as easily as that, but it will when it's wet. So definitely this gives you a good working time. It's a really nice tip. Okay, now I want to combine those last two tips together. I told you about overpainting on your edges, and I told you about wiping paint away that's over top of dried paint. We're going to use both of those tips to paint her shoes. Now, since I have this blue paint here, I'm going to paint her shoes blue. Why not? But you can see here that I did my overpainting. So the pink paint has gotten onto her shoes a little bit. What that lets me do is come back up with my second color right up to the edge, just like that. I don't have to worry about trying to make the peach straight and the blue straight. I just make the blue straight because it's the second one that I'm working with. So I'll just put this on, cut in all the way around. And I can see up here that I went a little crazy, so I'm going to go back to my wet brush and I'm going to wipe that away. There, look at that. Isn't that a nice line? Just to make sure though, let's get the magnifying glass out. So let's see what we've got here. I can see it. Okay, that is really pretty close, but there is a little bit that needs to be wiped away. And when you guys ask me why it takes me a week or two to make one of my pieces, this is why I get caught up in these little tiny details, wiping away an errant little bit of paint, trying to make it as perfect as I can. It's just me, it's just what I do. Now, as you're painting, you also want to be very aware of the end of your painting area. Don't leave, for example, a big glob like that, because that's going to end up drying and looking bad. Always feather it out and smooth it if you're going to leave a dry edge like that. Now let's apply that same lesson to these pants. Remember, we overpainted these onto the base? But before I do that, let me just tell you, you should always save the base for last because it lets you hold it and handle it and makes it a lot easier to not mess it up as you're working. But since I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes, I'm going to go ahead and paint the base, at least the part around his pants. So here he is, and just because we're going back and forth with the colors, I'll use red for the base here, my nice tiny brush. Now, because we overpainted and I've got some on the base, I don't have to worry about getting any up here, and I know that if I do, I can brush it away easily. So I'm just going to let my brush go right up against, almost to his pants, but not quite on his pants. Because that is the way I set myself up for success here by painting that line ahead of time, and I don't have to worry about it. All right, that's a pretty good line. Did I get any in there? I don't think so, but if I do, you know that I can just wipe it away with a wet brush. Now I want you to imagine if instead of doing this, you had tried to paint only the shoe blue and then only the base red. I mean, you're guaranteed to mess it up. All right, that's pretty close. Just to be safe, I'm gonna get my wet brush here and I'm gonna go in and make sure I don't have any on the pants. There we go. So obviously I would come back later and do the whole base, but you can see here that by doing the pants first and then the base later makes it so much easier. So this is kind of why I was saying that you should do the hard parts first, because under these pants, that really tight crevice, get that out of the way, get it painted. Then when you come back with your second color, it's so much easier to put it on there. All right, so I've been talking about cleanup when the paint is wet, but what about when it's dry? Well, remember I told you I had this brown up here that I was gonna come back? This is what I'm gonna show you for removing dry paint. Let's say that I painted all of his hair brown and you see this little speck right there. I left that little speck. Oh no, I don't like it. It's not perfect. So let's see how we can get that off. Of course, it's fully dry though. Our trick here is going to be a toothpick. So I'm going to take this nice sharp edge of a toothpick and I'm just going to very gently scrape away that paint. Look, there we go. I got that little bit off of there. So you can scrape against the original porcelain. Because I don't prime, because I don't need to prime, I'm just really scraping right back to the original piece and that works great. So the toothpick is a great way to scrape off little bits that maybe didn't dry right. The toothpick works great for removing paint. It's also a really good tool for adding paint. So let's go back to our little girl here with our dress and let's say we wanted to, maybe add a cute little design on here. I could dip this toothpick into my paint, get the tiniest bit on there, and I could create a tiny, tiny little heart on here. Once again, as you know, because I'm doing paint on paint, I could wipe this away if I don't like it. But this can work really great for those little tiny areas. I used the toothpick to draw the little faces on the bunny slippers for my Ralphie doll. That was a really fine line. And I also used it for my Taylor Swift figurine when I gave her lipstick. I made her mouth a little bit larger using a little tiny toothpick. Another really cool tool you might not have thought of is the back end of a paintbrush. This works great when you want to add dots. So let's say we wanted to pattern this dress with polka dots. Take the end of a brush, different size handles is going to make different size dots, but dip it into the paint and get that little dot on there and just dab it right onto your piece and get a perfect little dot. Dip it again every single time to get the same size dot. See that? Dip it again and we'll do another one. If I go for a larger handle, I'll get more paint on there, and when I do this, I'll get a bigger dot. That's something to keep in mind if you want to do lots of polka dots and get nice even shapes. So I already told you about how you can use a Q-tip to remove paint, but I actually found these really cool things recently. It's a little better than a Q-tip. It is a little tiny applicator that is like a pointed Q-tip. It's called a nail applicator and it looks and behaves the same as a Q-tip. It's just got this nice little point. It's nice for if you wanted to remove areas or get down into a little pointed area. It's kind of nice versus a regular Q-tip. Another neat tool that I found also in the cosmetic section is these little cosmetic wedges. These are really great for applying texture or really light sort of surfaces. Now, I'll take one of these, I'll cut it into smaller pieces like this so that I don't use a whole one, I just use little bits. And let's go back to our piece here and say we wanted to add maybe some shading here. So I'm going to just dip this into a tiny bit of the paint and get some on there, dab it off because I only want a little bit. And then maybe if I just wanted to add a little bit of texture for whatever reason, but this is kind of a nice way to get a little bit of shading or texture or maybe like an ombre effect. Maybe I wanted to kind of blend. This is great for blending colors live on the piece. You see it's kind of red on the bottom and then kind of goes up. So that's sort of just a fun little texture that you can try if you want to use this. The cosmetic sponge is exactly what I used when I did my Indiana Jones. The idol stand needed to look like stone and needed to have that rough sort of texture, so I used a couple of these with some black, some gray, maybe some green, I don't remember, and I just kind of splotched it on and gave it that really nice sort of mottled, rough look. So this is a really good technique. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is eyes. Often I will leave the eyes alone on a piece, but usually I will change the color to match the color of the person that I'm trying to recreate. I got my example here again, and we're gonna change her eye color. There's gonna be 3 steps to this. First is adding the solid color, then we're gonna add the black on top, then we're gonna add a little white dot. So I've done this one already so that it's dry, but let me show you how I did it here on the other side. I take my toothpick and I dip it in a little bit of the paint, blue, green, whatever, brown, whatever color I wanna make it. And then I just very carefully dabbed a little in there, and I just start smushing it around right up to the edge until the whole thing is covered. Go very slowly, very carefully, and remember you have the ability to wipe this paint away with your brush if you get a little bit on her skin. If you miss it and don't see it till later, you can also try the toothpick to scrape away the dried stuff that might have gone on the edge. Magnifying glass helps a whole lot on this one, but definitely don't try to use a brush on this. You will never get this kind of detail with a brush, but the toothpick totally does the trick. There we go. Okay, so now they both have blue. Now that this one is dry over here, I'm going to show you how we add the pupil in the middle. I'm going to get a clean toothpick, and this time I'm going for some black paint. Now, as far as the shape of the pupil, it's sort of round, but because these eyes are pointed at the top, we're going to sort of mimic that teardrop shape, but we're going to have it go all the way up to the top. So we're going to start here in the middle with a circle, but we're going to stretch it up to the top to the point. And you can decide if you want a lot of this to show or a little of the blue underneath. All right, I went a little bit past, so let me get my wet brush here. The eyes are very important to get right, that's for sure. I know when I made my Ralphie, I forgot to give him blue eyes, and you guys lost your mind over that because of course Ralphie has bright blue eyes. Anybody who's seen the movie knows that. How could I have forgot? But that's okay. I went back and fixed it. I learned my lesson, and going forward, I gave everybody the right color eyes. All right, see that? Isn't that cute? Okay, we can do the same thing with this side after it dries. We've done the color and then the black. Then we're going to take the tiniest little dot of white on the end of a toothpick, and we're just going to put a little dab just to give that little speck in her eye, and that makes all the difference. When you're working on eyes, definitely do them in phases. Let each coat dry completely so that you get it exactly right. Go back with the toothpick and scrape if necessary. When you're applying the next color, like the black over the blue or the green, do that very carefully so that you can wipe it away while it's wet, and then put that little white dab on at the end after everything else is dry. Don't do like I just did, wait for the black to dry. And that way, if you don't like the way that it is, you can just wipe it away and do it again. I'm telling you, this water-based paint, being able to wipe it away, really helps with these fine details. Okay, so speaking of eyes, a lot of people have asked if they're painting the skin, whether it's to do a person of color or a witch or an alien or something, whenever you're painting the skin, how do you avoid getting paint on the eyes? Well, my answer is just don't paint the eyes, but there are some people who want to mask that off. So I recently tried some of this Liquitex masking medium, and I've put it here on this eye for you and let it dry so that we can see how well that performs. To apply it, I dipped a toothpick in the medium and I put it on the eye just like I did when I was painting that girl blue. I did the same thing here. I let it dry. It dried to a clear. You can kind of see there's a little bit of gloss there to the finish. Now, when it was drying, I had to prop this up exactly so that the eye was flat so that it wouldn't drip down and cause tears or anything. But it seems to have dried okay. It's kind of hard to tell. I'm gonna just go into some of this this weird green color here. We're gonna make him kind of an alien, and I'm gonna go for it. I'm just gonna paint over his eye and make him like an alien. Give him some nice green skin. Maybe he's an alien, maybe he's the Grinch, maybe he's a witch. All right, we're gonna let that dry and come back to it. Okay, while that dries, I'm gonna talk a little bit about symmetry. You've seen my Mr. T, right? And if you remember when I made him the first time, I forgot to add his eyebrows. Well, I went back and added them, but here's the thing. Eyebrows need to be symmetrical, as close as you can, right? It's very tricky to do anything symmetrical, but I have a couple of tips that will help. The first tip, of course, is to work quickly, and while your paint is wet, if you don't like it, wipe it away. I've shown you how to do that a few times, so you should be good with that now. The other most important thing to remember when you're working with anything that has to do with symmetry is to do your non-dominant side first. I am right-handed, which means I do the left eyebrow first. Why? Because I'm not as good on the left side. When I'm trying to paint something on the left side, it might be tricky for me. Get the hard side done first, and then the right side, the dominant side, you have better control, you'll have a better chance of being able to get that right. That can really save you a lot of struggles. Do the hard part first. I've been saying that all along. Do the hard part first, then the easier part is easier. By the way, I redid his second eyebrow, I think 5 times until I got it right. It's not 100%, it's 99%. Good enough, right? All right, I think our little green eye is dry enough. Let's see if we can get that masking medium off. Remember, the masking medium is right here over his eye, and then the paint is around it. I should be able to just remove this with a toothpick. I think that's how this stuff works. If I just kind of go in here and sort of try to scrape it up. Oh, look, it's coming. There it is. That came right away, and there's his eye underneath, and there's a little bit that got removed. Can you see that? Okay. Do I like this approach? Yeah, that's pretty good, actually. I mean, it worked pretty well. The result you get is only going to be as good as your skills when you put the masking medium on. Does it help to use the masking medium? Yes, if you're really good at applying it, but it's the same process as applying the paint. So either you spend the time up front being really meticulous and trying to get the masking medium on, or you spend the time with the paint trying to get it perfect. It's sort of 6 of one, half dozen of the other, but everybody has different skill sets, so try it out and see what you like. I've also heard people say you can use Elmer's glue for this. I have not tried this. I only used the actual masking medium, but if you tried it and it works, let me know in the comments below. I'd like to hear about it. The last thing I want to talk about today is the finish or sealer that you put on your piece after it's done. I like to use a brush-on sealer. I don't like spray-on because I don't want the sealer everywhere. I want to use different finishes on different parts of the piece. On Mr. T, for example, I do all skin with a matte finish. I don't want any shine on the skin. That's my personal preference. And then all the rest of the pieces, I use a satin finish. It matches the finish of the paint, so I know as I'm going that I'm going to like the satin finish. It gives it a nice coat of protection and seals everything in nicely. I like to use a brush-on varnish, not a spray varnish, because I like to have lots of control. I don't want anything to drip or run. I like to make sure that it gets down in all the little crevices. I use a nice big fat brush with a nice soft bristles. That way I can kind of get it down in here and get all of the little crevices and get everything exactly the way that I want. I don't put it on the eyes whenever possible. I do the matte on the skin and then the satin on everything else. Okay, that was a lot of painting tips, and I hope you found that really helpful. Now you know a lot of my secrets. I want to give a special thanks to my experimental test subjects that were so kind to let me try these painting tips on them so that I could share it with you today. I hope you found this helpful and that these tips help you in creating your altered moments. I hope you're a member of our Facebook group. We have an amazing community there of like-minded artists who are creating their own altered precious moments, and it's been really fun. So if you're not a member, go ahead and join. I'll put the link below. If you want to learn more about our favorite tools and supplies, I've got everything linked below so you can shop all of my favorites. Thanks a lot. See ya.